Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson, the host of Bumps and Thumps, the Talk of Wrestling. I want to tell you about a good friend of mine's book, Joyce Poston. Her book, My Ringside Seat to the AWA, gives a close look at all the events she attended in the AWA from the mid 70s through the 80s. Joyce has taken thousands of pictures that you won't see anywhere else and tells stories about her times with Bobby Heenan, Nick Bockwinkel, Sergeant Slaughter, and many others. Also, the foreword of the book is written by Sergeant Slaughter. So go to www.joycepostion.com and get your book today. Welcome to another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the Talk of Wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today is one half of the Half Flyers with Greg Gagne, Killer Bees with Jumpin Jim Brunzell, two-time AWA World Tag Team, and just an all-around great guy. I want to bring in Mr. Jumpin Jim Brunzell.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Jim, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I always enjoy these podcasts.
I know you do. It's great to see you. How are things going for you?
Very good. You know, the summer we've had, I imagine you have, the last month and a half, the weather's been absolutely gorgeous here in Minnesota. We haven't had very little rain, although compared to the first part of the summer, we had rain for, I think, we had 27 inches of rain since April 1st until about the middle of June. And now it's just been gorgeous. It's going to be 82 today. So it's been nice.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
How about you?
Oh, we're going to be about 80 today. We're down here. We're dry too. We haven't had rain in a couple months.
Yeah.
And but the weather's been good here the last few weeks. I mean, not too cold.
Yeah.
Not too hot. So I like it. I like it a lot. So,
yeah, me too.
All right. So I want to get into a little bit, if we could.
Sure.
You know, you got into wrestling in the early 70s.
Yep.
You went through that famous class of 1972 at the barn. You know, I want to talk a little bit about your college time. You were a wide receiver, tight end, correct?
Yes, I was. The University of Minnesota. Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. I walked on. I had gone to a parochial high school for 2 years, a boys' school in St. Paul, and I decided to transfer to White Bear Lake, which was a public school. And in so doing, I lost 1 year of eligibility, so I couldn't play varsity football my junior year. So I only played 1 year of varsity football at White Bear Lake, and I had a real good season. We lost in a championship game by 1 touchdown, and I was leading receiver and the leading scorer, and I had the most interceptions and fumble recoveries, and didn't have an opportunity to be recruited by any of the big schools. There was a couple of little schools that were interested in me, but I wanted to go to the University of Minnesota, so I decided I was going to just walk on, and I did that in 1967 in the fall. And hardly anybody knew me. We had about 3 or 4 high school All-Americans on that freshman team, and lo and behold, Greg Gagne, Vern Gagne's son, was a walk-on too as a quarterback. And he and I wound up, being on the same string, and we did pretty well, our freshman year. And Greg and I became good friends, and he invited me over to his house, and they had a palatial mansion on Lake Minnetonka, the big lake in the Twin Cities. And I got to meet his dad and his mom and his sisters, and they treated me very nice, and that was my first real introduction to somebody, a big star athlete like Vern Gagne, who,
Right.
lived pretty doggone well. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I was going to say, you and Greg, you went through that camp. Now, you went to Kansas City, or did you stay in the AWA after camp?
I stayed in the AWA for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then they decided I needed more seasoning, so they sent me down there in middle of '73 into '74. I spent a year down there, and that was the NWA and Central States League, and Pat O'Connor, and what's the heck was his name? Doggone it, he had a bald head and
Geigel?
yeah, Bob Geigel were the promoters there, and Kansas City was unique compared to the AWA in the fact that you wrestled every single day, 7 days a week, and then you'd open up in a starting match, and then you come back in a tag team. So I wrestled about 14 times a week for about 10 months down there. And I think I averaged about $160 a week they paid me. So that was, not very, my cupboards were pretty bare, and I had a 1-bedroom efficiency, and I had 2 air mattresses, one for a guest once in a while, and then mine, and they both leaked. So we both wind up on the floor in the morning. Bob Backlund came in one time, and he was going to Texas, and I blew that thing up, and in the morning he got up and he says, Brunzell, I think your air mattress you let me use has a link in it. I says, I was going to tell you, Bob, but I thought I'd surprise you.
That's great. That's funny. So you got a lot of good experience down there. Weren't you partners with Mike George?
Yes, I was. He was my first real tag team partner, and we had a good tag team, and we had good guys to work with, Lord Alfred Hayes and Roger Kirby and a couple other guys. And it was a great opportunity for me because, the Funks came through Kansas City, and so did the Briscoes, and Harley Race was there. And I learned so much, from those people. Plus, I had the opportunity of working with Terry Funk later in my career, and same with Harley Race. And they were very influential in my progressing in my trade of, pro wrestling.
Yeah. I followed your career when I was kids, especially, when you were in the AWA with the High Flyers.
Right.
But you were also a very good singles wrestler. You wrestled Bockwinkel, which I think you said in your book was one of your favorite opponents.
Without a doubt. He was a classic. I mean, he had so much talent, and his psychology and everything he did in the ring. He was one of the top 5 during my, era. He was just, I watched him have a 30-minute match in St. Louis, and he had it with Dory Funk Jr., and it was by far the best match of the evening. It was just incredible. I mean, those guys, 2 unbelievable stars were just, it was wonderful to see.
Yeah, that era, had so much talent, so much experience, and they were willing to teach.
Yes.
They would take you in the ring and work with you,
mm-hmm.
and develop you. Do you think that today that might be a missing component?
Oh, well, it is definitely, because there's not that many skilled wrestlers that really know how to work, period. I mean, everything has changed, Brian, is in terms of the psychology of wrestling. Everything's on TV, and it's under a restrictive time, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and you can't tell, much of a story. And I want to go back to the basis of pro wrestling is built on the storyline between good and evil. You have the baby faces and you got the heels. So they're involved in a, a match, and the crowd reacts accordingly. So that there's none of that around. I mean, I can't watch the wrestling. I watch a little bit of AEW and a little bit of WWE when I can, but it's just everybody's the same persona. Everybody's tougher than hell. Everybody's ego is up to their eyeballs, and nobody puts anybody over, and it just gets boring. And then you see the matches, and I will say that Barry Orton, or not Barry Orton, but what's his name? Randy Orton, and there's a guy in the WWE who, gosh darn it, he's good too. And Owens. Yes, I think those are the two best guys, really. And they have some other guys, but I watched that Orange Crush or whatever he is in AEW, and I thought, oh my God, he might be a nice guy, but I can't really see him as a top contender as a babyface. That's just me. I might be wrong.
No, well, I'll tell you, how do you say it? The concept of wrestling, to me, like when I was a kid, you guys would come through the Rice Lake, Wisconsin. That was my hometown when I was a kid. You come through the small towns. You might do an event and raise money for an organization, whatever. And now you don't see that. You don't see your favorite star if you live in a small town. They're not going to come through there.
No, they might in the summer if it's a spot show that's close to a major city where they're going to have a big event, because they'll put the puzzle together. They want to make sure that the timing is right with their travel. So that does happen, but you're right. You just don't see it. And the reason why Vern was so good with it is because he saved all those spot shows for the spring and summer, because in the winter months, everything was captured for the big cities, because everybody come in the big arenas, 10 to 20,000 people, and the weather, it didn't play any part of it. But when you get into the spring and summer, another thing, Vern realized that people were cooped up, during the winter. He cut way back on the booking in the spring and summer, because he realized people in the Midwest, they want to do stuff in the good weather. They want to go fishing. They want to go hunting. They want to go, to their lake cabin, what have you. So he booked the talent appropriately and according to that weather, variance that he had in his territory. Whereas, you get down in, and I'll mention, Vince with WWE, they booked, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. I mean, it was just, I remember, and I think I might have mentioned this to you before, but when Brian Blair and I were there as the Killer Bees for 3.5 really solid years. And for 3.5 solid years, we averaged 27 days a month working. So we only had 3 days off a month, and that wore on everybody's relationship. As far as I was concerned, Mary, my wife of almost 50 years now, really handled it so wonderfully. And the kids, our kids grew up, and even I'd come home and it'd be one day, and I'd be recuperating. Next day we'd do stuff as a family, and the next day we'd sort of recoup, and I'd pack up and go on the road again for 7, 8, 10 days. But that's one thing I saw in the WWE, that it affect family life, because if you were a pro wrestler, that was the place to be in the WWE, because in the early 80s when Hulk left the AWA and went to WWE, that was it. I mean, he was the golden goose. He created such a dynasty for the WWE, and he alone really did it. I mean, he was fed a lot of talent, but he was he was a big kahuna, and he made Vince into a multi-billionaire.
Yeah. I wanted to say that, when you talk about Vern and his creativity about booking and all that, and when you went to WWE, your family life, you talked about a little bit. What a lot of couples probably didn't make it. Do you kind of regret going there instead of staying in AWA? Yes, you made less money, but you had more time with your family.
Well, here's the deal, Brian. If you're a pro wrestler, you have to go where the money is. And at that time, I had my own gym, which I opened up. I had that like for 6 years. So, in the AWA, that afforded me, some time off when I was there. And, I made enough money to, make ends meet and blah, blah. I didn't, you can never really save a lot of money.
Right.
So when I went to the WWE, I mean, that was it. You just and the reason why I went to the WWE is because Vern's territory was just going kaput. He wasn't making. When I used to make a couple, $2-3 grand a week, I was lucky to make $900 a week. And I told him, and I might have mentioned this before to you. I said, Vern, I said, hey, I've got my family, I've got the gym, I've got my house. I said, I need a personal contract from you to guarantee me X amount of dollars. Otherwise, I'm going to have to leave and go to New York. So he asked me, he says, well, how much you want? And I said, $95,000. And he looked at me and he says, go to New York. You're not worth it. So 3 days later, I was in Poughkeepsie, New York, doing the first of many, many TV matches and interviews with my buddy, Gene Okerlund.
Yeah, when you left, you could feel the impact. And I also want to say that when you went over there, you guys should have won the title, you and Brian.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
And, I know there was some animosity with you and Vince over something, but I don't know if you watched that documentary on Vince. Have you watched that on Netflix?
I'm on. I think I have 2 left. 2 of the chapters.
But what he keeps saying is that personal feelings shouldn't affect business. However, I know you've had some moments with Vince, and I think that was personal, and that's maybe why I like to get the titles. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. He definitely didn't like me, and that's fine because I didn't like him. I realized what a slave driver he was, and then George Scott, who was his booker. George Scott was a nice guy and a better than average worker in the ring, but God Almighty, he was a horrible booker. He was a horrible. I worked for him down in Charlotte for 18 months. And I'll tell you a little story. Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, and myself had a little program. I was the Mid-Atlantic champion. On TV, he had that gimmick round boot. And we're on TV one time. Boom, boom, boom. He hits me with that loaded boot. Down I go. 1, 2, 3. So about 2 weeks later, I wrestled Khosrow on TV, wound up putting a sleeper hold on him and taking off his boot. And I ran down to the announcer and I said, I've got the Iron Sheik's boot. I'm going to beat him and get back my Mid-Atlantic title. So the first time I go to work with him is in Roanoke, Virginia. And it's a 3:00 on a Sunday afternoon. And I believe that night at 8:00, we were going to work in Charlotte. So I get in there, and Sandy Scott, George Scott's brother, was the agent in charge of Roanoke. So he said to me, Jim, did you get the finish tonight between you and Khosrow? And I says, no. I said, what is it? And he says, George wants you to do a Broadway, an hour draw. And I said, what? He says, yeah, an hour draw. And I said, Sandy, I said, I've got Khosrow's boot that makes him neutralized in the ring, and I can't beat him in an hour. I says, you might as well dig a hole right in the middle of the ring and bury me, because I'll never draw any money again. So we did this hour draw, and honest to God, the first 5 minutes, it was like pulling teeth with Cosmo. He was so stubborn and so clumsy, and I thought, oh my God. But finally we got the hour done, and then so I told George, I said, what in the hell are you doing? I said, and granted, that there's different ideas that, the wrestling talent has with the, the booker, but, and then there's a lot of talent that are in there, ass kissing all the time. And I need this and I want to do that. And this will work. And I can draw money with him. I never did that. Never. I just thought, hey, if there's, if they have an interest, and like they did a deal with Kent Patera and I in the Mid-Atlantic, and we did really well. But then Cosro, this goes on, I'm chasing my belt, and I'll make this real short. We're wrestling in a small town in South Carolina, and it was Indian reservation. So we're there, and they had a pretty good house, and it was outside. So I said to Sandy Scott, he was the booker there, I said, what's the finish? And he says, another hour draw with Cosro. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. So we're having a match, and it was just like, it was like going to the dentist and having 3 teeth pulled with no Novocaine. I mean, that's what I compare going in the ring with Cosro. God rest his soul. So we go in there, and somehow or other, he takes a bump outside, and he goes, oh, I hurt my back. So we're out on the ground, and I said, is your back okay? And he said, no, it hurts. So I said, well, just stay out here and we'll get counted out. So we got counted out. And the next morning I get a call from the office, and they said, George wants to talk to you. So I go to the office and I said, George, what's going on? What's up? And he says, I told you to go an hour. I wanted you to go an hour last night. And I says, yeah, I said, but Cosmo hurt his back. And he says, no, he didn't. He said, he said his back was fine. He said that you called getting counted out. And he says, I'm going to have to let you go, Jim. I'm going to have to fire you. And I says, well, I said, Cosmo's lying. And I says, thank you. I says, I needed to go home. So that was it. I got fired from him, by him. And, time was right for me to go. And then I never looked back, and then I went back, and it actually worked out good for Greg and I, because we had a couple runs, with Bobby Heenan's group, and made some money, and I was home, and everything was good till Hulk left.
So I want to talk about, Hogan left, everybody started leaving. Do you think if Vern would have changed his strategies and how the business was going, if he would have kept like big guys like Hogan, maybe Patera or somebody champion, because Patera was a big draw. He turned on America that one time.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have worked?
I think the only way it would have worked is if he would have made Hulk the champion. They could have fed him for years. He was the most over baby face I'd ever seen in the AWA and the WWE. I mean, he just, he had so much charisma, and he was athletic, and he could speak, and, he just looked the part. And, he looked like he could be a world champion. He was 6'8" and 312 pounds and muscled, and he could play a bass guitar. And, I just thought, it was it was a pure case of Vern's ego, because Vern could not justify having a world champion after he was the All-American collegiate wrestler, good guy, this and that. And, and then all of a sudden you have a muscle-bound guitar player that could talk like, he could talk like a son, but he could work. People don't realize this, but I watched Hulk in Japan when he worked for Inuki. He'd work and get down on the mat and do these holds in reverse. He was incredible. I thought, holy smokes. And then when Vern didn't give him he had, I don't know how many matches with Nick, and disqualify Nick and, Bobby Heenan to get involved and da. So finally it got to the point that if they kept running Hulk, against Nick and with no title exchange, it was going to kill the territory. And that's what they almost did, because people were, they called Hulk the people's champion, and Vern just couldn't get it in his head that if he let Hulk go, he was going to kill his business, period. Because when he left, Jesse left, Bobby Heenan left, Gene Okerlund left.
Yeah, a lot of them left.
And even Jack Lanza. Jack Lanza worked in the office for Vince. And Patera left. And I mean, it was ridiculous. There was nobody there. Nobody there. I mean, there was, Rick Martel left. Tito left. I mean, the AWA had nobody.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. I want to tell you about a great book written by my good friend, Mr. George Shire. It's called Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling, From Vern Gagne to the Road Warriors. George dives deep into the golden age of wrestling, starting with the 1950s, talking about Lou Thez, Vern Gagne, Wilbur Schneider, and many others, and goes all the way deep into the AWA and into the 1980s, ending with the tag team domination of the Road Warriors. Now, this book includes photos of George's personal collection, as well as programs and sports facts that was published for many years. So go to Amazon today or the Minnesota Historical website and get this book as soon as you can. And folks, enjoy the podcast. They tried to bring in guys like the Road Warriors for a while, but they all left too. Do you just think it was a personality clash? I mean,
well, the Road Warriors were a real extreme tag team. I mean, they were accepted as baby faces, but they went on the interview and they said to the crowd that they're going to beat the shit out of their opponents, and they did. They didn't sell for shit. They beat the crap out of you. And so how are you going to draw money when you got an unbeatable team like them? And they were, God rest their souls, but they were thick enough in the head not to realize that they have to sell to make a match. And they just wanted to, beat the tar out of you and then pin you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember those days.
Yeah, they didn't get over in the WWE either.
No, it took them a long time to get those tag team titles finally.
Yeah, I know it.
It took a lot of years.
Yeah.
But, well, after you left WWE, when did you leave WWF? Early 90s?
Yeah, he fired me 3 times, and I think the last time was in 94. So I'd worked there from 85 to 94 off and on, good 4 years to begin with. And then he fired me, brought me back. And Brian, I got to tell you, even working part-time, I was making 50 grand a year, part-time. Yeah. So I was working, like 4 times a week, and you can't beat that for 50, you need the money.
Yeah, no, yeah. I don't blame you at all. Because I know a lot of guys with Vince, the money's good, but sometimes you have some tension. Was it difficult to work there even though you were making good money?
Oh, yeah. Because the schedule, like I said before, 27 days a month. And I mean, you were flying every single day, renting a car, going to a hotel, going to the gym, going to the arena, wrestle, come back, stop, get something to eat, have a couple beers or a couple joints, and then go to bed and then get up again and do the same thing the next day. And I remember talking to a Northwest pilot, and I showed him my schedule and how many days we flew in a row. He said, that's not healthy for you. Just like pilots, they can't fly every day either. So we were flying. I remember Brian and we did 52 or 53 straight days without a day off. Wow. I broke my hand Greg Valentine broke my hand in Rockford, Illinois. Had a double wrist lock, and I went to take him over, and he went to block me, and my left hand just went popped. It went pop. You could hear it in the ring, and I said, ah. And Hammer, Greg Valentine, did you hurt your hand? I said, yeah, you broke my hand. So I wound up going home. They let it sit one day, and they put a cast on it. I only missed 2 days and came back, and Brian and I won more matches with the clothesline with the cast on my hand than I ever did with the drop kick. So blessing in disguise, but no belts.
No belts. Is that kind of a big regret for you that you never got those belts?
Well, here's the deal. The whole idea was getting the belts is if you have a world championship belt or a championship belt, you're going to make more money because you're going to be featured. So the fact that we had some incredible matches, I mean, we had great matches with the Bulldogs, the Rougeos, and we had, let's see, I think it was Tito and Martel we had a hell of a match with. And then, the Hart Foundation, we had great matches with them, but we just couldn't, Vince just didn't want to give us the belts, period. And it was a shame, and I was disgusted, and Brian was too. But then we found out, and I made this pretty clear that I told Brian, I says, hey, we're getting screwed on these damn action figure dolls. So Brian, I have the original contract that we signed with New York back in 1985. And in that contract, it said the talent would receive 25% of the gross of outside revenue as far as, merchandise. Outside, 25% of the gross. So, I remember guys like Cosro, first quarter, his dolls came out. He got a check for $93,000. And all these guys, there was, and then Hulk was making 50 grand a week on his royalties. Yeah. So I remember Brian and I got a check, and our dolls had been out, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, more than a quarter. And it was $10,000. And I said, what? So I said to Vince, I said, geez, what happened? He said, well, you guys are in the later, segment of the dolls, and, maybe they just didn't, don't worry, they'll, catch up. Well, I told Brian, I says, Brian, this son of a bee is screwing us. So I said, I think we should sue him. So we did sue him when we got, when we were done, and we won the case, won $100,000. And not only was he not paying 25% of the gross, he was paying all the talent except for Hulk, 8% of the net.
Oh, even though it was 25% of the gross.
Yeah, he paid 8% of the net. So he owed all the talent there, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, and that's what happens when you have independent contractors, dealing for, one knucklehead who is a greedy person.
Yeah. Do you think promotions like WWE, AEW, those big ones, they should, okay, they got guaranteed contracts now, but like health insurance, stuff, things like that, do you think they should
Heck yes.
cover that, or at least?
Yeah, I remember when I get her. I remember one time Cosro choked me out and then threw me out onto the floor from the ring, and I was dazed. And when I hit on my left eyebrow, and I had my whole eyebrow split open. I had like 29 stitches, and it cost me $650 out of my pocket, to get stitched up that night. And I mean, can you imagine the? Well, I'll say millions of dollars that these promotions got away with from all the guys. Just think all the, I've had 13 surgeries since I stopped wrestling. Mm-hmm. And, thank God I had insurance. but
Yeah.
they need to have, first of all, they need to have insurance. They need to have a retirement. They need to have a decent work schedule where you're not, 4 to 5 days a week is plenty. I mean, there's no sense, if you're 20 times a month, I mean, that's on the heavy end. I think it should be 15, it should be half a month, 15 days. And then, you get a certain percentage. They just paid you what they wanted. Nobody knew, how much you were going to get. I remember the first couple of weeks I was in the WWE, I was making $4,500 a week. And I thought, wow, this is really going to be nice. And after about a month of that, it went down to, 2,200 a week. And I was working the same amount of time. So I thought, Jesus, and then I questioned Vince a couple times. And he says, well, I guess I'll have to take that up with the accounting. That's what he said, You could, they had all the answers. And I'm sure that, much to Brian's chagrin, it was just, he didn't like me. And I think I might have told you this, the first time I was there, I flew into Poughkeepsie, got on a small plane in Newark, and I first met Hillbilly Jim Morris, the big 6'9", ex-basketball player, nice guy. So we talked and we went to Poughkeepsie, and I did a couple straight babyface interviews. And Gene Okerlund, was great getting back with Gene, and he asked me all these questions, and I talked about 2 or 3 minutes, and had a good baby face, all-American athlete type, interview. Yeah. So as he ended and I walked off, I heard Vince say, "Oh no, we have another Backlund." That's what he said to me, and I thought, "Oh boy," And then I thought, well, Backlund, he made $400,000, 4 or 5 years in a row. Maybe that'll be the same for me. It wasn't. But so right off the bat, the very first day, I just,
Yeah. I can only imagine. But I wanted to talk after you got out of wrestling.
Yes.
You retired from wrestling. Let me back up a little bit. When you were hurt, if you were hurt,
yep.
Do they have workman's comp?
Oh no, nothing.
You were just SOL.
Yeah, they didn't take care. Some guys they might have, but they didn't take care of me. I mean, I was hurt. I most of my injuries were after a long period of time of repetition. Landing on my elbows that jammed my shoulders that caused calcification in my shoulders. And the same with my knees, jumping up, stopping real quick, and keep doing that, and you have almost 5,000 matches, and it just takes its wear and tear on your body. And there comes a period of time afterwards, it was hard to walk, and I thought, well, I'm going to have to do this. And, I had this one, I had that one replaced, I had the hip replaced, and the shoulders, and then they pinched a nerve in my elbow, and I had that relieved. And a lot of people don't realize this, but I was in a match with Bobby Heenan, and I got kicked in the groin, and I had a blood clot in my testicle. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so I had to have that removed, and Brody was in the area. He just came into the AWA, so they worked the program with me and Brody, where he had hurt my stomach and I had to have surgery. So that actually really happened, but they just, it just worked out. Well, we'll just use Jim with Brody, and there was a character, oh boy, if he didn't like the promoter, he wouldn't work at all. He just, I thought, oh my God. I told him, I says, I had a match with him. He didn't want to sell nothing. He walked out of the ring about 3 or 4 times, come back in, didn't do nothing. I thought, oh God. I told him, I says, Frank, I said, we're in my hometown tonight, St. Paul. I says, I got to live here. He said, oh, don't worry, Jimmy, don't worry. And we had a hell of a match, and it was funny, and not funny in the fact that I remember I was still working for Vince, and I went to Dallas, and I was in the airport there, and I went to get some breakfast. So I sat down, and all of a sudden, Frank Goodish comes up and he sits down with me, and I says, "Where are you heading to, Frank?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I'm going to Puerto Rico." He says, "They owe me money," and little did I know they killed him that weekend.
Oh man,
And
yeah.
it was horrible. It was horrible, but
Yeah.
he was a hell of a guy. He was one of the very few that his demands got met. And he drew a lot of money. He was hard to work with, but if he could see that there was money involved, he did a good job.
Yeah. Wife is a heck of a nice lady.
Yes, she is. Yeah. Yes, Barbara, wonderful.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to retiring. You retired in what, 99?
Yes, after I had my fifth on my birthday. I had my 50th birthday, and I wrestled Jim Neidhart in a small town. I think it was in Iowa, and Kenny Patera had booked it, and Jim was out of his mind. He was like a bull in a china closet. And there's another one who, God rest his soul, he died too early. But I thought after having that match, and I thought he was trying to extract my liver without any sedation or painkillers at all. So that was it. I said, I can't do it. That was my 50th birthday, and that was the end. So, I've been fortunate, and Greg and I and Brian and I have been able to, go to different signings and Comic-Cons and this and that, and still stay in touch. And, we have a couple, and it's fun to do. And then I promote my book. Matter of fact, I'll show you.
I was just going to bring that up next.
There it is, MatLands. And that picture of me, I'm sitting on the porch in Kwajalein Atoll out in the Marshall Islands. My dad was a Navy pilot, and he was an air sea rescue. So we were stationed out at this little atoll in the Marshall Islands called Kwajalein, and it was 3/4 of a mile long and a half a mile wide, and it was all coral. And the Japanese had owned it during the World War II, and they had still armaments on the beach. And so, as a matter of fact, there was one kid, one of the pilot's kids, picked up a shell and it blew his hand off. And it was, but the one thing that was great about it, and I was only 5 years old, there was no school and there was no TV. All you had was radio. And then, and it was all military personnel. And I remember that the bus used to come and pick us up on Saturday morning, and then they'd have newsreels with cartoons for the kids to watch. So we were there for about a year. So that was a, heck of a education right there. And I found out since that Kwajalein right now is a Nike missile base for, protecting the Hawaiian Islands and whatever. It's all, CIA and whatever it is.
Can't talk about it.
Nope. I don't know anything about it other than that they've got missiles there. So.
Yeah, your book, MatLands, I've read it.
Yes.
You signed it for me. It's a great book on your life from the time you were born until, later in your life. And I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's just
thanks, Brian. And my wife helped me with it. And the genesis of this book was, we'd go out with different couples, and I'd invariably tell them a story from the road. And I remember one of our friends said, as a matter of fact, I think it was Kathy Smeagol, one of Mary's best friends, said, Jim, you should write a book. So, and it's funny, I started writing down these little anecdotes and stories and everything. And it took me about 5 years. And then I went through that Burb, the company where it's offered, BLURB. And I've done considerably well. I thought about it, and I know you're having your book out on Vern, and if you try to go with Amazon and those other ones, they take 40% of your profit margin. So you're selling a lot of books, but you're not making any money.
Yeah.
So I'm selling very few books, but I'm making very little money. No, I sell enough. As a matter of fact, I have an old teammate, and he's been a great salesman. Yeah, I think he sold 12 books for me. So
Wow,
all
that's
of his
great.
some of his ex clients, and
Yeah.
I always tell the people, hey, all this is true, and there's not anything really demeaning about to anybody in it.
No.
And that's what I wanted to do. And I mentioned Vern, I mentioned all the promoters I worked for, and I survived wrestling. I mean, a lot of guys haven't survived. A lot of guys have died and have had committed suicide and ruined their lives with alcohol and drugs. And it's been a shame, but and that's the nature of wrestling. Pro wrestling is founded on two words: greed and deceit. And those promoters use those two words pretty well, and have been for the last 70 years.
Yeah. One last question. You talked
Sure.
about a lot of guys passing away early in life. Do you think because you were raised in a military family that helped you guide you through those temptations with alcohol, drugs, and doing things that you shouldn't be doing, living
Well,
that rock and roll lifestyles per se?
Well, I think I had a good Christian background, and I had a wonderful wife and good kids, and I partook in all sorts of stuff. I did some drugs, and I drank my share, but I didn't let it get the best of me. And I realized that hey, my first job is a husband and a father, so that's what I placed first, and I was so fortunate to have Mary be my best tag team partner, for the longevity of my career. I mean, I owe everything. Our kids were, I couldn't ask for better kids. They both accomplished a lot. My daughter's going for a doctorate degree in education, and my son owns his own film, what film, I'm trying to think of what a festival. Film festivals, Sound Unseen, and he has it in Austin, Texas, and in Minneapolis.
Okay.
So that's about it. I just feel fortunate, and I'm starting. I'm right from here. I'm going to go work out a little bit. I can't lift much weights,
Right.
but I try to get a little sweat in, and then come back and take my Jera Speed and Ziggity Hoo and a couple protein pills, and away I go.
All right. Well, what's coming up for you? You got any events coming up that you're going to be attending or going to?
I can't think of. Oh, I'm going to go see Bruce Springsteen in Winnipeg on November 13th. He's 15th, excuse me. He's going to be up there, and just so happens that I know Kevin Donnelly, who runs the big arena up there, and he wasn't involved with the wrestling, but until I was gone. But he remembers me, so he's and we're looking forward to it, Mary and I. This will be my 50th time seeing Bruce in 46 years, and it'll be 14 different cities involved. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, again, folks, that book, MatLands, it will be in the description below. Get the book. It's a great read. It has a lot of great pictures of Jim and his family and his wrestling career. It's a great read. I think you'll really enjoy it. And one more time, Jumpin Jim Brunzell, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian. God bless. We'll see you.
My friend.
Okay.
Hey, folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we'll talk to you soon.